The Hook by the Prowler. For the past year, Dave has asked Sally out on a date, but to his dismay, has always been rejected. That was until a few days ago, when she finally gave in and said yes, during the final period of school. Now tonight was the big night. Dave drove to Sally's house and picked her up at 7. Their plans were to see the new horror movie that just hit their local theater, then go out to eat. Dave wanted the night to be special. Although he and Sally had been friends since elementary school, his feelings had grown into something more since they'd been in high school, and he believed for her as well. He was proven to be correct in his assumptions. They arrived right before the movie started, and even though the movie was new, there was barely anyone else in the theater. About halfway into the movie, he made his move, placing his hand on her thigh, then leaning in for a kiss. At first, he thought he would be instantly rejected, but after a momentary pause and quick glance around the room, she kissed him back. In the back of the darkened theater, they continued to make out until the movie was over, which led to them deciding to skip going to the restaurant and head up to Lover's Peak as they went back to the car. Food could wait until after. They wanted to continue the romantic part of the evening, and Lover's Peak was a perfect spot for that. Up on a hill overlooking the town, it was a secluded place where couples would go to be alone. They pulled up around 9 o'clock, and they realized their car was the only car there. Strange, they thought, for a Friday night, but were glad for the seclusion. Dave parked the car right at the edge of the cliff so they could see the entire town below. The stars in the sky and lights from the town below lit their view as they stared at each other passionately. He reached over to turn on the radio, and they picked up right where they left off from the movie theater. After about 10 minutes, into some pretty hot and passionate kissing, the song on the radio abruptly ended, and a breaking news bulletin began being read.
This just in. Robert Davis, the sadistic killer, is reported to have escaped the Tranquil Heights mental facility an hour ago. He is considered armed and dangerous for the hook he has in place for his right hand. Police are warning anyone in the area of Tom's Bluff all the way up to Lover's Peak to lock your doors and windows, and for anyone that is out and about to quickly head back into town. For more information, stay tuned for updates on this channel. Now back to your scheduled programming.
Sally pulled away from Dave and began to get scared. When he leaned back in to kiss her again, she pushed him back and said, "No, didn't you just hear that report? The killer just escaped. He's out there." Dave smirked. "Calm down, Sally. Baby, that mental facility is miles away from here. Plus, we're on top of a hill. Nobody with one hand could possibly make their way up here," he said sarcastically. He tried going in again, and once again she pushed him off, screaming no. This time, "Didn't you listen? The report said he escaped an hour ago. He could easily have made his way up here by now. I want to go home. Or let's go get something to eat. I just want to get out of here," she said nervously. "I really don't know why you're so scared. Nothing is going to happen to us here," he said assuredly as he reached in for another kiss. Sally pushed him back once more and told him, "Shut up and listen." "Didn't you hear that?" she asked frantically. "I heard something, almost like something is scratching." She then looked into the rearview mirror and could swear she saw a passing figure. As Dave began to laugh and try to pass off her concerns, she yelled at him to drive, start the car and go. I want to get out of here now. Do it now. Even though he was frustrated, he relented to her screams and put the car in drive and sped off. He didn't take her home like she wanted, instead to the restaurant like originally planned. He didn't want their evening to end on such a bad note. Sally didn't put up a fight because she didn't want their evening to end either. They pulled into the restaurant parking lot and parked in the front. He told her to wait and he'd get her door for her. He got out and made his way around to the passenger side door. When he turned the corner, however, he gasped. Staring back at him, hanging from the door handle, was a bloody hook. The hook is a classic urban legend, a piece of American folklore that dates back to the 1950s and gained attention when it was printed in a Dear Abby column during the 60s. While many versions exist, namely the locations and the scenario, even the location of the hook, they all are a reference of morality. Daughters, keep your virtue safe, or danger might befell you. The Babysitter by the Prowler. It was a Friday night, and like every other Friday evening, Jenny was being dropped off at the house of the family she babysits for, the O'Sullivan residence. The home consisted of Dr. and Mrs. O'Sullivan and their 3 children, Tabitha, Paul, and Sally. On a usual Friday night, the O'Sullivans were typically gone for a few hours, usually going out to see a movie, then to a restaurant. But tonight they were attending a charity dinner for Dr. O'Sullivan's hospital, and Jenny was asked to stay longer into the evening. The O'Sullivans ordered the kids a pizza before they left, then said goodbye to the kids and left for the evening. Jenny locked the door behind them, then did her usual routine of checking the windows, then going to the kitchen to make sure the back door was locked. With the house secure, Jenny then went into the living room and joined the children to watch a movie. The children were always well behaved, except for this night. They were being difficult because they wanted to watch a scary movie, which they were never allowed to do. After much complaining, Jenny finally relented and agreed. She told them that she would put a scary movie on once the pizza arrived. When the pizza arrived shortly after, they all gathered in the living room and sat on the couch to eat their pizza and watch the movie. Around 8 o'clock, which was a half hour into the movie, the phone began to ring. Jenny quickly turned down the volume on the TV and answered the phone. "Hello? O'Sullivan residence," she said, sounding official, but momentarily there was no response, just silence. So she asked again, "Hello? Is anyone there?" As she was about to hang up, the silence was broken by a maniacal laughter, followed by a man's voice who said, "Prepare yourselves. I'm on my way." All the while laughing that sinister laugh before hanging up. Jenny sat there confused for a moment until one of the children asked, "Who was that?" With the movie turned down, they could all hear the man on the phone, and they were a little frightened. Jenny looked at the kids and gave a light-hearted laugh, smiling at them and saying it was just someone playing a prank. She told them they were perfectly safe inside the house, and there was nothing to be scared of. They went back to watching the movie, and after another half an hour, everyone seemingly forgot the strange phone call, until suddenly the phone rang again. Jenny, like before, turned the TV down and answered the phone. "Hello? O'Sullivan residence?" she timidly asked again. That evil, sinister laugh answered her. Then the man said,
The hour approaches, my dear. I will soon be there. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe 30. Who could say? But I'm coming for you and the children.
The man hung up, and Jenny sat on the couch completely frightened. Paul asked if it was that man again. Jenny shook her head yes, and picked up the phone and dialed 911. She told the dispatcher everything that had happened and that this strange man was threatening her and the children. The dispatcher told Jenny they would try and trace the call if it happened again, to find out where these calls were coming from. 15 minutes passed by, and Jenny and the children sat in the living room, frightened, waiting to see if the phone would ring. And it did. Jenny reluctantly answered and said hello. It was the man again, laughing his horrible laugh. Jenny screamed, "Why are you doing this? What do you want from us?" The man stopped laughing, and his voice lowered into a serious tone, and said,
To bathe in your blood all night long. I'll be there shortly.
Jenny hung up in disgust and fear. Just then the phone rang again. She didn't want to answer, but she did, screaming at the man to leave them alone. But through her screams, she heard the dispatcher's voice. They told her the calls were coming from the phone line upstairs. The dispatcher told her to put the phone down, gather the children, and run outside. The police were on their way. Jenny was filled with absolute dread, but did as she was told. She grabbed the children and told them they had to run outside and wait for the police. As they left the living room, they heard the door from the first room at the top of the stair swing open and crash into the wall, then saw a man walk out. He stood there and grinned, the darkness masquerading his face, all except that wide, sinister, crazed yellow grin. He said, "I'm here for you now, children," and slowly started down the stairs. Jenny and the children screamed and ran out the front door to wait for the police. When police arrived, they went inside and found the man hiding inside one of the children's closets. When they took him away, he was still smiling, that sinister smile. This story, The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs, is a classic urban legend, a piece of American folklore dating back to the 1960s. There are many versions and interpretations of the story that have more lighthearted and more grisly endings, but they all warn of maintaining and keeping a watchful eye on your children. Scratches from Above, part of the classic Urban Legend series, written by the Prowler. Martha and James went camping up in Mount Charleston. This wasn't the first time they've been camping up there. They usually go camping every other weekend, but this was a special occasion. It was their usual Valentine's camping trip. They drove up in the morning and got their camp set up by the afternoon. There was a light snowfall as they set up the tent. Then they went on a hike and gathered some wood to start a fire. They sat by the fire and talked, then cooked dinner. The snow started falling a little more heavily now, so they left the fire and decided to head into the tent. They got underneath the sleeping bag and began to make out. Just then, Martha thought she heard someone walking in the snow. "Stop it, James! I hear something." Hear what? James asked. Crunching in the snow. Don't you hear that? It's probably just an animal. Calm down, Martha. You're always so jumpy. No, James, I'm not doing anything more until you go see what that noise was. Fine. I'll show you there's nothing to be scared of. Stay here. Stay undressed. I'll be right back. James put his clothes on, grabbed his hatchet, unzipped the tent, and went out. It was freezing. Zip the tent up, James. It's too cold. Yes, Martha. Whatever you say, dear. Martha could hear James walking around the camp. She then thought she heard him say, I don't see anything out here. I'll be right back. I'm going to the bathroom. But wasn't quite sure because of the muffling of the tent and the wind picking up outside. Martha waited for James what seemed like forever. She looked at her cell phone. It had to have been at least 20 minutes since he's been gone. It was a small blizzard out there. No way he would have been taking his sweet-ass time. Martha was getting very concerned at this point. Just as she was putting her clothes back on, she could hear footsteps in the snow approaching. Oh, thank God he's back. She laid back down and waited for him to open the tent. Nothing. James, stop playing games. It's not funny anymore. Stop trying to scare me. 5 more minutes passed. She could hear rustling, but James still hadn't opened the tent. Whatever, James. Keep playing your games. You're in the doghouse now, pal. No action tonight. Just then she heard a scratching on the top of the tent. All right, James. That's enough. No more games. Martha unzipped the tent and rushed out. All right, where are you? You son of a... When she looked up, she saw James dangling from a tree branch. His throat had been cut open, and the scratching she heard on the roof of the tent was his wedding ring. Martha screamed and ran to the car. She drove to the nearest ranger station, and they called the police. When they arrived, she led them back to the campsite, hoping to find a trace of the killer. All that remained was a trail of footprints in the snow that ended a few feet from the tent, and James' mutilated body swaying in the wind. This is yet another classic urban legend, a piece of American folklore that dates back decades. There are many different interpretations to this legend. The setting usually takes place in a car or some type of vehicle, and either the tips of the man's shoes or his fingertips scratching the roof, depending on how he was hung. It's another tale of morality. To protect it, or some harm may befell on you. High Beams, part of the classic Urban Legends series by The Prowler. Julie was wrapping up her shift at the perfume counter in the department store she worked at in the mall. The day was long and tiring, and she looked forward to spending a nice, relaxing evening at home and going to bed. The one thing she was not looking forward to, however, was being one of the last ones to leave, which comes with the territory with the closing shift. An empty parking lot late at night, with no one around, gave her the creeps. She's seen the movies, She knows the drill. Even though she was on high alert, the feeling of leaving the safety of the building and having to make her way out to the car made her uneasy, even though she parked in the parking lot right outside the front doors. On this night, she was particularly tired. The store had been swamped all day and night, with it being close to the holiday season. She even had a few bags herself, full of presents to lug out to her car. She locked up and said goodbye to a few of her straggler co-workers that headed in the opposite direction as her. That's when she was hit with the first hint of uneasiness. Where was the security guard who was usually patrolling this part of the parking lot? No security car, no guard, just the cold night air that hit her skin as she surveyed the parking lot. The wind began to pick up and howl into the cold, hollow night, and that's when she was hit with a second feeling of uneasiness. The parking lot wasn't empty. There was a van parked in the parking space across from hers. The lights were off, but she thought she could make out the silhouette of a man in the front seat. She walked in a quickened pace, but didn't run, for she did not want to alert the man in the van. As she reached her driver's side door, she was still struggling to get her keys from her purse, which she had been trying to do the entire walk to her car. She was panicked, but it wasn't full-blown yet. All she wanted to do was get inside her car and leave. As she finally got a firm hold of her keys and pulled them from her purse, the van's lights turned on, blinding her eyes for only a moment. She raised her hand up to shield her eyes from the lights, and she could make out the man exiting his van. She was full-on panicking at this point. She quickly got her door open and threw all her bags on the passenger seat. She could see the man in the corner of her eye. He was huge, and he was walking towards her. As she quickly flung herself inside the car, she thought she heard him saying something to her, but couldn't make it out, because the wind had picked up quite a bit. A storm was approaching. She quickly jammed the key into the ignition and started up the car. At that very moment, a loud bang hit her window.
Get out of the car. Get out of the car.
She put the car in drive and peeled out, barely making it out alive, she thought, his scream still barely being heard as she did so. As she pulled out onto the highway, she felt a sense of relief. She was alone, and she was safe, on her way home. Just then, the entire inside of her car was lit up. Julie looked into her rear-view mirror. It was the man, and he was hitting her with his high beams. She became panicked once more. What did he want? She thought. Why is he doing this to me? In her frightened state, she did all she could to keep control of the car and her wits about her. All the way down the highway, on, off, he kept flashing his high beams every few minutes. He's trying to get me to crash, she thought. She saw a bright neon sign coming up in the distance. It was an all-night diner, just off the next off-ramp. She slammed on the pedal. I can get help there, she mumbled to herself. The first time during this whole ordeal, feeling some kind of relief. She took the exit and sped into the parking lot, screaming for help as she jumped out of the car and made her way into the restaurant. She told the waitress to call the police, the man in the van just pulling into the parking lot as she did so. Julie then pointed and said, "That man out there, in that van, has been following me for miles, flashing his high beams and trying to drive me off the road." She sat and waited for the police, sitting at the counter, watching the man in the van the entire time. He didn't move. He just sat there and watched. It didn't take the police long to arrive, and when they did, Julie ran out and told them everything that happened. They dragged the man out of the van at gunpoint, throwing him to the ground. He began to scream,
No, wait, you don't want me. I didn't do anything wrong. There's a man in her back seat. I was just trying to save the lady.
The one officer stayed with the man in the van, while the others slowly made their way to check the back seat of Julie's car. There, the officer found a man with a knife, grinning sinisterly at him. The man in the back seat was arrested and put in the back of the squad car. As the man in the van explained it, he was leaving the department store after picking up a few presents just before closing time. And as he was loading everything in the back of his van, he saw the man get in the back seat of the car and then slump down, never getting up the entire time he was watching him. The man in the van thought it was strange that somebody would just get in the back seat and take a nap in a parking lot with a winter storm approaching. So he sat and watched, and when he noticed the girl walking towards the car, he knew the car didn't belong to the man who got into the back seat. As she got closer, he saw the man in the back seat pop up for just a second. He had a knife, and he was watching her. And as she got closer, he quickly laid back down and hid. The man in the van said that's why he turned on his lights right when she got to her car, trying to show her there was a man back there. And when she didn't notice, he got out and tried to warn her. He said what he was screaming was there was a man with a knife in the back seat. Get out of the car. Then when she didn't listen, he followed, trying to make sure the man in the back seat couldn't attack her. Every time the man sat up to stab her, that's when the man in the van would flash his high beams. High beams is a classic urban legend that dates back to the late 60s, first talked about by folklorist Carlos Drake in late 1968 from conversations with Indiana college students. It later gained more attention, however, in 1982 when it was mentioned in an Ann Landers advice column. There are, of course, many different versions and interpretations to this classic piece of American folklore, while usually always involving a woman driving alone and being pursued by another car or truck, following close behind and scaring the woman. They then flash their high beams, trying to prevent the killer in the back seat, who the woman does not know about, from attacking. Other versions have the woman stopping for gas, and the gas station attendant informs the woman there's a problem with her credit card, and they need to speak with her on the phone. Then once inside the safety of the gas station, the attendant tells the woman there's a man in her back seat. There's many other different locations and scenarios where this story plays out, all with the same moral to them, though. The person who tries to help the driver, that being the attendant at the gas station, the man in the van or truck, comes off as frightening, a scary-looking man who the woman mistrusts without reason. She believes the attendant or driver intends to do her harm, when in fact, he is the one who saves her life. Bring out the old adage, never judge a book by its cover. The Hitchhiker by the Prowler, part of the classic urban legend series. I ran to my dorm room after my final class ended. I opened the door, collected my bags, said goodbye to my roommate, and walked to my car. It was winter break, and all I could think of was getting the hell out of here and going home to my family. I had no time to waste. I had to drive cross country, and if I wanted to make it home on time, I needed to leave right away. By midnight, I was driving through the Arizona desert. My eyelids were getting heavy. Cigarettes and coffee were my friends, but I couldn't stop. I was almost at the state line. Home was nearly there. As I turned the corner, my headlight caught the silhouette of what looked like a female hitchhiker. I drove past her, but almost immediately put on the brakes. I know. I should never pick up hitchhikers, but it was pitch black out there, and it had started to rain. I backed up my car, reached over and opened the passenger side door. A dark-haired, what looked to be 5'2", beautiful young woman bent down and asked if she could get a ride to Las Vegas. I said of course, since I was heading the same way. She put her bag in the back seat, closed the door, and sat up front. She thanked me profusely. I said it was no problem. I could see she was shivering from the rain, so I turned on the heater, reached in the back seat, and handed her my sweater. I asked her what she was doing out there all alone. She replied that she was on her way home from college for winter break. I told her I was doing the same, which broke the ice, and we began to get to know each other. As she was speaking, though, I gave her a once-over, and noticed she seemed out of place. I don't know how to explain it. Her clothes, her mannerisms, hell, even how she spoke, seemed like it was from a different era. I didn't think too hard on it, though. She seemed like a sweet girl, and I was enjoying her company. After only a few miles, we were already becoming fast friends. It's strange, but there was just something about this girl. We even talked about hanging out during our time off before heading back to school. I even told her I would drive her back to her school on my way back to mine when our break was over. After about an hour, I noticed I was getting low on gas. Thankfully, we were now at the state line, and there was a gas station right before we crossed over into Nevada. I got out and went to pay for the gas and asked her if she would start pumping. As I got to the door, I turned back and saw her put the hose in the gas tank. I turned around, opened the door, and told the cashier, 20 on 5, please. My friend is already pumping it. The cashier looked at me with a smirk on his face and said, there's no gas being pumped on 5, looking at me like I was nuts. I handed him the 20 and said, what are you talking about? Turned and pointed towards the car and said, my friend, she's right there. Nobody was there. I ran out of the station towards the car, but there was no sign of her. She was gone, even her bag. A voice behind me said, you met Mary, mister. I turned around. It was a cashier. I asked him what he was talking about. He proceeded to ask me if I had just picked up her hitchhiking. I said yes. Then he asked if she wore clothes that seemed from a different era, and spoke like she was from a different era as well. I said yes. That's exactly her. But how did you know that? That's Mary, he said. Everyone knows her around here. She's haunted this stretch of highway for decades now, and always this same time of year. Mary was killed in 1955. Her body was found about an hour back from where you came, lying on the side of the road with her throat cut. She was on her way back home to Vegas from college for winter break. Wait a minute. You're telling me I gave a ride to a hitchhiking ghost? I said sarcastically. You sure did. You're not the first guy to do it, you know, the cashier said. My God, I thought to myself. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. I walked towards my car and looked inside the passenger door window to see if there was any trace of her. The only thing that was there was my sweater, lying on the passenger seat. And it was soaking wet. The Vanishing Hitchhiker is a classic urban legend told through the ages. It's not only a piece of classic American folklore, but it's a story told throughout the world. Knowledge of it expanded through the public. However, in 1981, with the publication of Jan Harold Brunvan's nonfiction book, The Vanishing Hitchhiker, in his book, he suggests the story of the ghostly hitchhiker can be traced all the way back to 1870s. The story usually consists of a person or persons traveling by vehicle meet with or pick up a ghostly hitchhiker who subsequently vanishes without explanation, sometimes even leaving behind an item, telling the person who's driving someone was actually there, and not just a figment of their imagination. Be careful while traveling, and who you might pick up, for it may be a ghost looking for companionship. Never flash your high beams, part of the classic Urban Legends series, written by the Prowler. In my adult age, I've become cautious of the dangers that lurk in the night, and I can point to one particular event that caused this cautiousness. I've always been a fan of the horror genre, since as long as I can remember, movies, books, and urban legends. As a child, I was always thinking about horror, and one story, a particular urban legend, stood out during the time of the incident in question. I believe I read it in one of the scary stories to tell in the dark books, which I read constantly during the time, so it was fresh in my memory. The urban legend I'm referring to is the high beam initiation. Now, if you're not familiar with that story, let me refresh your memory. A person or persons are driving in a car late at night and happen across an oncoming car in the opposite lane with their headlights turned off. So the occupants in the car decide to warn the oncoming car by flashing their headlights to let them know their lights are off. Most people would think that would be the proper, polite thing to do, to give a nice friendly warning, but in this instance, it seals the concerned driver's doom. You see, the car has its lights off for a reason, and those reasons differ, from it being a gang initiation ritual, or just a madman playing a game, looking for someone to kill. But the story usually ends with the concerned driver's demise. Out of all the urban legends I've read about, they say that this is the one that actually happened, and that's what stuck out in my child's mind at the time. Sure, there are others that could be true and could have happened, but this one definitely seemed plausible. I mean, there are gangs out there that have initiations, and there are crazy people out there on the streets, especially at night. So I took that knowledge with me. Even though I was a child in short pants, I possessed common sense and an understanding of surviving horror scenarios. Whenever I would be in the car late at night, usually with my mom, on our way back home from somewhere, we would see a car without its headlights turned on from time to time. But she would not flash her lights to warn them, for she knew the legend as well. Once the car would pass, we would always joke around, saying we dodged something bad, and go about our business. One particular night, however, the circumstances changed. We were out later than usual, on our way back home from a Christmas family get-together, I believe. And once again we came across a car with its lights turned off and dark tinted windows. The car looked ominous, but I didn't give it a second thought because I knew the rule. We don't warn people that their lights are off. But for whatever reason, be it her tiredness after a long day or her annoyance at the other car's stupidity, on that night, she did. She flashed her headlights as the darkened car passed us, turning them off almost immediately as she realized her mistake. I watched as she gripped the steering wheel, hoping, praying that the darkened car kept driving. All of a sudden, she screamed, "Shit!" as the car slammed on its brakes and made an angry U-turn. All of a sudden, the darkened car turned on its headlights and began flashing them rapidly as they sped towards us like an out-of-control freight train. My mom was panicked, but was doing her best to maintain her cool as she tried to stay ahead of the ominous car that chased us for whatever reason. Despite her best efforts, however, the car was getting closer. It even tapped our back bumper at one point. That was the time I was most frightened. The chase seemed to go on and on. I believe it was minutes, but it seemed like hours. Then, by some miracle, we gained some distance from them, around a corner, and lost them down the street it connected to of a darkened residential neighborhood. We then thankfully came across a police substation, and when pulled into the parking lot and got out of the car, there was no sign of the car, just a dark, empty street. We quickly went inside and told the police what happened, and they escorted us home. We never saw that car ever again, and of course never made that mistake again either. Now you know why I'm cautious, and if you should ever come across a car without its headlights on, one dark and eerie night, remember, don't flash your high beams. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.